Pratik Desai is head of applied AI at ListEngage, a Tata consulting services company focused on Salesforce AI and all things related to agentic AI. Pratik has a unique perspective relative to vendor guests because he's so deeply knowledgeable about both the products and their adoption dynamics. He's embedded in the rollouts of Salesforce, Data 360, and Agentforce in many leading companies. And he's also on the Agentforce advisory board at Salesforce and consults with product and leadership, representing the partner and customer community. Welcome, Pratik.
George, thank you for having me. It's always good to talk to you in general. First episode with you, so I'm excited to do this live.
Great. So, you know, um, we've been talking and we've been hearing from Salesforce about Agentforce. We've been hearing from so
Mhm.
many vendors about agents, but like let's take a step back and let's focus on the customer first and understand what are they trying to accomplish, what's their maturity level.
Mhm.
And you've, I know, in the past told me about segmenting, the different types of customers. Tell me, like, if you start in the enterprise, which is where everyone is focused, what are they trying to do, and what's their maturity level right now?
Yeah, I love that we're starting at the enterprise level, right? Because I think the enterprise level has the most amount of richness of things to solve. So, number one, you're seeing the DIY versus buy question top of mind for most IT organizations at the enterprise level. And the challenge is, I don't think we've actually solved the right answer, right? There's a little bit of DIY, there's a little bit of buy, and as these technologies continue to evolve, because they're evolving so quickly, we're shifting back and forth. And we're in the experimentation phase. So we're giving ourselves leeway to shift back and forth. But I think that's one of the big questions that's open at the enterprise level. The second thing that's open at the enterprise level is, how do you bring organizations together to have the same incentives, right? So you've got a marketer who's optimizing email click-throughs. You've got a salesperson who's optimizing bookings. And you've got a back end that's optimizing spend, but none of those are optimizing or mapped down to the bottom line. And that used to be a data problem, right? CDPs were a magnifying glass to all your data challenges. AI 10x's that, right? So the alignment is a problem, knowing that we have to start to embed agentic technology within workflows that are aligned. And then the third thing we're seeing at the enterprise level is the laggards and leaders. You've got a couple of industries that are at the leading end because they've got dollars to play with. And you've got a couple industries at the laggard end because they're being asked to do more with less, right? So the idea of waking up in 2026 and creating an AI strategy when you've got a core operation to run, you're still doing the digital transformation from 2024 pre AI, and you're figuring out, oh, hey, we've got a macroeconomic headwind that we got to get through. AI is going to be difficult for those folks, right? And so there's different ways to slice the enterprise. And I think depending on where the persona falls, we're having different conversations.
So let's talk about the verticals next, but let's hone in on what you were talking about, where first we had a data modeling problem, and now we have an organizational alignment problem. I reframe this as, or frame it as, like what Jeffrey Moore says, trying to align your technology model with your operational model, with your business model, where the operational model is getting the business processes aligned with the
Hmm.
technology foundation, and the business model is, you know, the end, the business outcomes you're trying to achieve.
Right.
And maybe um, talk about how, elaborate on how, like, when we put a customer data platform in, that you said magnified the alignment issues. Talk about how, you know a process of taking a what would it be, like a prospect, all the way to a customer who's, you know on a retention plan, like a loyal customer, how that cuts across departments, and how that's difficult to do in traditional technology models with
Hmm.
the application silos, the data silos, but most importantly, with the departmental silos on top of that.
Yeah, I think we got to slice that into a couple of areas, right? So we'll start with the data problem, right? Because the departmental problem starts to become a different beast. The data problem is interesting. If you pick apart any one particular organization, I've got as a prospective customer and even potentially as a repeat customer, I've got different points where I can enter my experience with you. And every single one of those interactions, I'm telling you something or I'm telling you that I'm not telling you something. Now, bringing that data together is a very difficult thing for organizations, and potentially I've got a disparate OMS system, I've got a disparate merchandising system, a website
OMS,
system.
just to be clear, is order management.
That's correct, right? I'm
Okay,
just
so
kind of
all different
focusing on,
departments. Yeah.
yeah, just focusing on a particular example, right? So I've got all this data that's disparate, but technically, if I bring it together, my customer is telling me a holistic thing, right? When again, we're agnostic, B2B, B2C, it's all a data problem. And the challenge has always been that because these organizations run in a siloed direction, they've got siloed data. Now the data cloud or the CDP problem was trying to bring all this together and give you one unified version of your customer, but not just your customer, one unified version of your customer and the corresponding metadata that the customer has told you, what I'm clicking on, what I'm looking at, when I'm not doing something, when I'm doing something, what I don't like, because there's unstructured sentiment data in there too. I might call and have a whole narrative around something that I potentially need to tell you. So bringing all that data together is a data problem, right? And then if you think about how organizations are trying to solve this, we are still trying to solve this, right? So becoming that road to agentic enterprise, we have to take the first step to getting this solved to get there, because as you start to apply AI on top of this, it's only scaling what is good or what is bad. Now, surrounding this is a workflow problem, right? Because the only way you get all the data into a particular organizational, let's call it data lake, data warehouse, or a centralized system is by aligning incentives. Because one version of the data needs to correspond to one vision of the business outcome. Well, if every single person in your organization has conflicting incentives and conflicting understanding of what the business outcome should be, for example, I asked your audience if you've ever worked at an enterprise. Think about when you worked there. Did you wake up day to day and say, I'm worried about the bottom line at an enterprise? Right? No, you woke up and said, this is my job to get done. And did you ever think about how that corresponds to the bottom line? Who's bringing that all together? The challenge for enterprises is bringing this all together, having every single part of the organization march towards one thing. That allows us to solve the data problem in the data gravity, which then
But
we want to scale
let
with
me
AI.
let me interrupt you for a sec, because
Yeah.
I've heard you in the past describe, like, give me some examples. Like the marketing guys care about click through, not about qualified lead that turns into high lifetime value or something like that. Like, so this is the link between the data and the organizational incentives. Like,
Yeah.
why has that been so hard to change?
I think it's a organizational change management problem, but I want to
Okay.
give you the example that you asked for, right? So the one example that I come back to in my career time and time again, we actually helped long ago in my career an organization optimize a particular KPI that was important to them, and it was a particular merchandising throughput problem where they wanted to sell a particular type of merchandise. So we pushed it using machine learning, found the right audience, pushed that particular merchandise, and all celebrated when it worked. What we didn't realize is in a different platform, returns spiked at a level that have never been seen before, and every return is 66% sticker price back to the retailer. And so while we're off celebrating because we've optimized the merchandising throughput at the data that we have, the actual business is losing money because the spike in return. So I think you understand what I'm saying there.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until we brought that data together in two disparate systems, right? We manually brought it together that we realized our win wasn't actually a win,
So
right?
that's
And
a
so,
that's a great example. But and I, just to jump in, what you're saying is you're designing a new machine, like an organizational machine, where data is the foundation of it, but the organizational change management is you have to pick the right business outcome in the form of a KPI, and then all the people who touch that and who might be affected by it, downstream and upstream, have to be involved, not just in contributing the data, but in making sure that their incentives and their outcomes align with this bigger outcome.
And that's how you become an enterprise, or an agentic enterprise, right?
Okay.
Is when you do that, and it's a change management problem. We're going to have to change the way we work. We're going to have to change the way we think about data. We're going to have to change the way we essentially align our workflows amongst our different departments and our different peers. It's a hard challenge, but we're on the way there.
I'm listening to you, and I just have this basic remedial question, which is, why did it take agents to think about outcomes, that are cross-functional?
I I'll give you my honest off the cuff answer here, George. Is I don't think it did. I think what we've been doing is actually piling on the need to do this for the last 20, 25 years, right? The disparate system problem started because there was a need to have disparate systems, and there wasn't a way to bring it all together. And then there started to be technology that could bring it together, but there are enterprises out there that just couldn't prioritize that digital transformation. They have a core value proposition they need to continue to deliver to their customer. So these are things and motions that have been in process, right? The data harmonization project is on a to-do list for almost every organization. And if they haven't done it, they're doing it. And if they haven't started doing it, they're getting to it, right? Now, is AI bringing up the need for the first time? No, right? What it is doing though is it's changing the amount of gap between them and their competitors at a different size scale, the commercial level, because the commercial team, the commercial competitor, now has a technology and an ability to scale with that technology that's going to close the gap, the amount of
Yeah.
time and resources that they need to come up to the enterprise level to
Yeah.
challenge your enterprise business. That gap is closed. And so it's not necessarily creating the need, it's magnifying the intensity of that need and the reason why it needs to start being a priority in 2026.
Okay. So it's like agents are shining a light on the fact that we need to go from silos to cross-functional business outcomes, and that we need to essentially redesign the organizational machine to support that.
That's correct, right? And if you're not going to, your competitors will, and that'll give them the leg up, if that makes sense.
Okay, so let's talk about, we're still on the enterprise, because like that's where people focus first. Like
Hmm.
vendors and sort of analysts are like, what are the big guys doing? And you talked about a little bit of, build versus buy, and on the build, there's a lot of experimentation. Talk about where they think, what they're trying to do on the build side, on the
Hmm.
do-it-yourself side.
Look, I grew up the persona that I grew up, I'm a traditional architect. I grew up building Legos. I grew up dreaming of building the new cool, sexy thing. And I think we're at a point where technology is transforming so fast and giving us so many tools to build. It's an exciting time for any IT organization to want to build. And they're trying, right? And I don't think it's a bad idea to try to build certain things. The challenge with build is you have to put your time, your resources, and your focus on certain aspects of your business. You have a core business to kind of keep up and running. There's
Yeah.
other things that you've probably put on your digital transformation roadmap that necessarily didn't drop off your plate. And then in 2025, you all woke up with an AI mandate,
Well,
right?
but bring it down to the concrete level. What are they building? And
Yeah.
I don't
So
mean the outcomes. I mean like the tools. Like, is it, you know modeling their own data, using agent development toolkits? Like, like is it that the CEO told the CTO, look, we got to get
mhm.
serious about this agent stuff, and then the CTO goes off on a science project? Like, what are they experimenting with?
Yeah, and I love the science project analogy because it is a science project. We're experimenting, right? So,
Yeah,
what are they experimenting with? We're looking at different proprietary models, right? So there's companies out there that are trying to take the models that OpenAI, Anthropic, and the commodity platforms that are pushing out open source models, taking them and trying to make them relevant for their particular business. What can they learn from their data, right? Their data, almost every company is already democratized on Snowflake or Databricks, and then can we learn something by running models on this? And is that beneficial to our company? Then number two, you're looking at agentic outcomes for our business, right? So how do we take the AI technologies like the Salesforces of the world and inject that into particular workflows across our organization? While 5, 10, 15 years ago, anything that was automatable, we automated, and anything that was required a non-deterministic resolution, we made it a human
yeah.
intervention. Can we start to take those non-deterministic requirements and take some of those and pass them off to agents? So we're starting to see builds of that. And what I mentioned in there is kind of a hybrid of build versus buy, right? You don't actually have to build from scratch. So there's
Yeah.
there's this hybrid model of buy certain things to build off of. So you can buy from Salesforce to build on top of it. You can buy a model or partnership with OpenAI to build off of it. Not everything has to be done from scratch. The third biggest thing that we're seeing, George, at the enterprise level is this idea of a enterprise grade co-pilot or assistant essentially. So we're seeing a lot of the desire for enterprises to drive all of their technology headlessly. So if you think about an enterprise, I wake up, I would log into Salesforce, I would log into Adobe, I would log into Oracle, I would log, et cetera, et cetera. And instead of doing that, the vision that they have is I log into our enterprise grade AI assistant and I tell it what I'm trying to accomplish for the day. And it's going off and driving Salesforce for me. It's driving Oracle for me, and it's
But
getting those jobs done.
this was like the example where Salesforce just introduced recently, like drive Salesforce from ChatGPT. Um, but but and it has some appeal. Like people like this, people are becoming accustomed to this chat interface. But um, there there is there is a need for specialized presentation and interaction with data. Like in other words, a
Hmm.
specialized UX to accomplish some task, even if that UX is generated. Like like completely headless sounds like it's going to
Hmm.
be challenging. I know I'm going down a this is like a futuristic sort of rat hole, but there where some people are thinking of ChatGPT as the universal interface to everything, like even OpenAI is having trouble fitting all their own products into the ChatGPT interface. So like that might have its use cases, but I doubt it's going to be universal.
I like where your head's at, right? Because in 2026, we need to meet agentic AI to the workflows we do today, right? So
Yeah,
I mentioned a couple of examples when we were talking a couple of weeks ago here, George, which is, if you think about a customer service agent, we've been giving customer service agents more and more tools for decades, right? And it was up to them to decide which tools to use. So I would not be surprised if you walked into any call center, right, anywhere in the world for any organization, and there's still folks taking notes by pen and pencil and then they input it later. And because that's the optimized way for them to work. And so while we are absolutely rolling out agentic AI within their workflow, within the UI that they work in today, there's a portion that are going to adopt that and that they decide that that's the tool that makes them more optimized. And there's a portion that are going to see on pen and paper, right? Even though they had all the automations, the notes objects in Salesforce CRM, they're still on pen and paper. That's just how they work. So what we're thinking about here is the behavior change to adopt AI starts with putting the tools in front of the folks and seeing where the champions emerge. And the champions that emerge can start to evangelize their way of thinking across the workflows. At the enterprise level, we're seeing bottom up work
um,
way better, but more importantly, champion bottom up work way better, right? And I'll give you another example that we just recently had a organization that has thousands of sellers. They go drive to their client site, they have their meeting, and they walk back into their car. And traditionally, what they did was they sat there and on their phone and inputted everything into Salesforce CRM. Well, we've given them the ability to get in that car, start driving, and go to their next destination, and all the while talking to Agentforce with natural language, describe what happened. Agentforce takes all of that information, takes the necessary inputs, puts it into the notes object, the opportunity object, whatever it is, and potentially even launches off the next step. Has
Okay.
every single seller adopted this? No. Some sellers, the way they operate is completely outside of the workflow that was described. They want it all in their brain. They go home, they write it all down, and they have their own workflow to eventually get into CRM. So while we are creating the customer behavior change, there's always going to be these outliers that say, that's not the way I work in the workflow. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah. So okay. So we first talked about sort of the top down, getting a mandate and
Hmm.
trying to align across departments and the change management challenge of doing that. Now we're talking about making it easy for someone to evangelize and adopt as an individual by reducing the burden of like data entry that was always, it was rigid and it almost felt like extra work. So that in the enterprise is a bottom up way to see adoption work. Um, I just want to I want to um, shift to something you had mentioned to me earlier, like smaller, not much smaller, but like what I guess would be categorized as commercial accounts, like $1 billion and maybe somewhat below size companies, where it's easier for a top down to work. Tell me about the dynamics there, because it sounds like herding cats might be somewhat easier.
Yeah. So what we're seeing at the commercial level, George, is essentially a company profile where the founder or CEO is very much still involved in defining the workflows, the day-to-day operations, while they might already have, and they tend to have CTOs and CDOs and CMOs, CROs, they're very much involved in the operations within each one of those organizations. So while the AI moment happened in 2024 and 2025, the CEO, the founder, is looking at this, as I mentioned earlier, as the way to close the gap between their enterprise competitors. So we're seeing a heavy lean in from the CEO, the founder, saying we need to operate the business, we need to set the sales towards this particular goal. And that alignment at the top and the day-to-day involvement from that CEO and founder to get involved, dissect the workflows with us, to dissect the goals and the ways that we're going to change the behaviors within the organization. They're essentially getting into the organization with us. That's made a huge difference in the top down approach, right? Because they're helping look for the opportunities to change the workflow. They're helping look for the champions. They're helping look for the reasons why it's not being adopted and change course on these experiments and helping us pivot. If you think about where we are with agentic technology, we've got a technology without a product market fit. We're continuing to look for problems to solve, but we don't know the largest problem to solve. We don't know the best problem to solve. And any organization where the CEO and founder and the C suite, whatever it is, the leadership team rolls up their sleeve and gets into that startup way of thinking with us is making a huge difference in the adoption of their particular organization.
So let me give you an example. You tell me if if this is valid. I've heard from another vendor that they can see like a world of difference between like a huge bank in terms of onboarding a customer might take many days or several
Mhm.
days, whereas like an emerging sort of tech centric bank with a sort of a new platform can onboard a customer, I think in I don't know whether it was like half an hour or a couple hours, something like that. And
Yeah,
that would I imagine that's an example of where top down they're like, okay, this is the business outcome. It's got to work across all these departments, know your customer,
mhm.
compliance and setting up an account. So I assume that's an example where smaller size herding the cats is easier, and so getting results is something that seems to be happening sooner.
You hit the nail on the head, right? And I think the one thing I will add there is at the commercial level, what we're seeing is a ability to experiment and pivot quickly. As you mentioned, it's the herding the cats is quicker because of the size, but not only the size. A lot of these commercial companies, I would argue, are digitally native, right? And so they
So that,
understand the problems we have to solve. Going back to what we mentioned earlier, we've got a data problem,
yeah.
we've got a technology problem, we are all learning AI together, and we've got a workflow problem, right? And
So the
so taking
technology and operational models are easier to align. One, because they don't have as much technical debt, and because the CEO or founder is involved, it's easier to align the different departments because he or she's more directly involved.
and probably digitally native, right?
Okay,
And so
okay.
that's I think that's where we're seeing the difference between enterprise and commercial and the level of maturity of adoption at this point.
Just to put a fine point on this, like typically, like applications lived in the business units and in the departments, and the platforms and tools lived under the CIO or the CTO.
Hmm.
And what's different about this is it has to bridge both of those. You need a business oriented KPI that needs to change, but you need the support of the CIO and the
Hmm.
CTO to implement, the data changes and drive the new application workflows.
That's
So,
correct, right?
okay,
You've got an IT organization under your CXO, your CTOs, CIOs that needs to architect all your data together towards a unified business goal, which means they
okay,
need to understand where all your data is, understand what the business goal is, and then you've got a business team that needs to get all the business units together and march towards a singular business goal, articulate it back to IT, who then needs to kind of work with their business partners to build towards one thing. It happens at an enterprise level much slower than a commercial level.
okay. Let's pivot to the product side of the house and how it's
Hmm.
maturing, because you've said something to me before, which is interesting, which is it's not a matter of maturity, it's a matter of product market fit at any given level of,
Hmm.
you know, product capability. So let's start at the very, foundation level. Like where does Data 360, formerly Data Cloud, fit when a customer, has spent the last 5+ years building a data lakehouse, whether it's, Snowflake, Databricks. When they encountered Data 360, how do they perceive it, and how is it positioned?
Yeah, I think the challenge there is that for the last couple of years, Data 360 was and always has been a marketing outcome tool, right? A CDP for marketers where they could build their segments and create activations for inbound and outbound customer experiences. The challenge is now we're pivoting that experience and we're pivoting that narrative towards what is more a data federation tool towards your Salesforce outcomes. And I think that's a key point here because what we're seeing is Salesforce quite possibly making the largest pivot from SaaS towards the new SaaS, which is software as a service, to service as a
Service as
software,
software, yeah.
and more importantly, the pivot from a CRM centric company to a data and AI company that happened to start with CRM outcomes first. And so I'm going to say that again in a different way here, George, because what I
Yeah.
think what we're seeing is Data Cloud is pivoting from a how do I activate customers for marketing outcomes, which is a CRM centric thing, towards how do I become a data foundation company, unifying the data across your enterprise so that you can add in AI to become an agentic enterprise and then create outcomes. Now, Salesforce is going to start with CRM outcomes first because it's what they know, it's their domain expertise, but there's no reason why they can't add other outcomes later, right? And so that reframing of the company, that largest pivot that I mentioned earlier, I believe that's the vision. And we're just taking baby steps to get there.
Okay, this is I want to I want to rephrase this in my own words, because this is the most profound change that Salesforce has made since their founding, is which is they were a they were the original SaaS
Mhm.
application company, but now the new platform is the data first about the state of the customer and their engagement process. That's the context, and then the actions are in the form of uh, tool invocations that an agent would call, maybe starting with activating customer segments, but other workflows in sales or service or whatever. And so um, it's a the reframing is really, really profound, because it's data first, and the actions that are integrated, the applications become essentially tools that you call. And the reason this is, I want to focus on this for a minute, is, like, I like to say that there are more agent development tools than there are fleas
Mhm.
on the average camel, because the agents are just a model, with a harness around them. The
Mhm.
value is in the unique data each company has in their data platform, and then in the workflows that that agent is going to invoke. So, whether it's Agent Force or some other tool, it almost doesn't matter at that level. It's the integration with the data and the actions. Now, um, this is where you said like it first started as a CDP, so you're
Mhm.
doing marketing outcomes. Then it's all CRM outcomes.
Mhm.
But with MuleSoft and Informatica, then you can have easy way to almost like bring data in with pipelines on demand, data engineering pipelines on demand from Informatica, because it knows about your legacy data estate. And with MuleSoft, you can have actions to other legacy
Mhm.
applications. So then that's where you go beyond the sort of customer outcomes. You become much more of a agent platform for sort of broader business outcomes, where the CRM is just your starting point. Is that how we should think about it?
That's exactly how we should think about it, right? So we mentioned earlier the Chat GPT integration with Sales Cloud, and I think that's awesome, right? But what it lacks is context, right? While it can drive Salesforce, it does not have your enterprise level context. It does not have your customer context, right? Where we can solve that problem happens to be on the data side. And that's why data, solving that problem, is the key part to becoming an agentic enterprise. That's why we're seeing Salesforce focus in there. While OpenAI, Anthropic, and potentially even enterprises are DIYing their centralized agent experience and calling MCP servers and driving headlessly, you're driving headlessly with no destination, with no context, and no map, right? Who has
Right.
that map? And that's the challenge that we're seeing with some of these ways that we're rolling out technology. You mentioned there's a no shortage of agent SDKs. There's no shortage of agent canvassing tools, but every single one of them is missing context. And that's where I think we're making a huge bet on this vision that I believe Salesforce is going under
Yeah.
towards, is that data is the center of becoming an agentic enterprise company. Then you add in the AI. That context is why that's so important.
And then the integration with the workflows become the equivalent of tool invocations. So
That's correct.
the real value is in the data and the tools, which represent the workflows. It's not the agent itself. Like that's just a model with a harness.
That's just a model with a harness, right? So you think about what is an agent as just a model. You're just onboarding an employee, and the efficacy of that employee. Right now, it's a digital employee, but the efficacy is based on the context you give them, the
Yeah.
instructions, the guardrails, and the access. Right. So the data cloud, the data 360 is the context. The MuleSoft is the access to do other actions, and then you add in the ability to actually refine and tune that model based on instructions given in Agentforce. That is a employee that I can get behind.
Okay, so let's drill into a little more about the Data 360 because that's the foundation. So it was originally like a way to activate customer segments,
Mm-hmm.
but now that it's being positioned as something broader, how are customers trying to make sense out of it after they've put so much time and energy into their Snowflake or Databricks data estates? You know, do they understand that this is a way to model their customer data and processes for the segment of their data estate that they would have to do by hand
Mm-hmm.
in Databricks or Snowflake?
So I think to answer that question, we have to kind of talk about who the audiences were depending on what the narrative was, right?
Okay,
So with CDPs, the audience was the CMO organization, right? Now with this narrative around data foundations towards your agentic enterprise, the audience is actually the CXO organization. So that kind of pivot that I mentioned that Salesforce is going under also includes a target audience pivot.
but
And now
that's
we're
a
having
profound. Let me stop you for a sec. That's a profound pivot from a sales point of view because Salesforce has had always credibility with the CMO or the head of sales or the head of support. They don't know the CTO or the
Mhm.
CDO or probably not even that well the CIO. That's not been their home base. How you know how do they get credibility with the technology side of the house, or what is their credibility with that side of the house?
I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of what is the credibility, right? Traditionally, Salesforce as a business outcome tool has been sold towards the business. Now, IT has been aware of it, either understanding that it needs to be deployed a maintenance team or aware of it in terms of something to integrate towards, but not the end user and not the audience that was sold into or understood as the maintenance team or the usage team. Now we're trying to penetrate the CIO, the CXO, the CTO organization and give them a tool that is essentially a data foundation for this new mandate. So we have to think about what the persona is experiencing, right? Under the CXO organization, they have this profound shift of narrative change from Salesforce, but it's coupled with a profound shift with a mandate change for their organization, right? All of a sudden in 2024, 2025, they're being asked to be the largest management organization in the company. They have to all of a sudden roll out all these agents across the organization and manage all these agents towards business outcomes, towards contextual understanding of how to onboard the digital employee. It's something that they have never done before, and there's no actual understanding of how to do it. We're all learning as we go. So if you couple the narrative shift from Salesforce with the mandate shift, I think everyone's getting kind of on board and saying, hey, let's learn together. But it's coming back to this idea of experimentation, right? I don't think there's any organization out there that's ready to say, this is the one way you do it. 20 years ago you chose IBM. 10 years ago you chose Salesforce, right? I think we're so new to all of this that there's not a clear and cut answer of if this problem, solve it with this particular technology. I think there's clear leaders emerging with Salesforce in the data space, and there's clear models emerging in the OpenAIs and the Anthropics and the Geminis of the world, but it's not immediately clear on how all this is going to be brought together. And if I think about IT's problem, it's not necessarily picking, your individual components, your ingredients to build out the recipe. It's understanding holistically what is the recipe going to be. So right now, all of the organizations are conducting experiments. So they're meeting the moment on the narrative shift. They understand why the narrative shift is happening because they've had a mandate shift. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but what I'm taking away is that this is like the consumer side of AI took off because chatbots there was no friction, and there was sort of immediate gratification and sort of all sorts of easy use cases. But here we have to put in a new data foundation.
Hmm.
We have to earn credibility with a new organization, a new side of the house, then we have to change the operational model so that we get across sort of functional silos. We have to have these end-to-end outcomes. This is a slow burn, and that there's no sort of killer use case, right out of the box where it's like, oh, customer service is just obvious. We put it in and it's ready to go. This is fundamentally like a lot of hard work because so much has to be sort of re-engineered at the technology and the operational level. So I guess my take is like saying this is the year of agents and it all takes off in the enterprise. It's more like this is the decade of agents, as Andrea Karpathy says.
I prescribe to the decade of agents, right? I think every organization is going to be on their own particular adoption journey. I think we can talk about it from a persona perspective. We see enterprise, works better if you choose champions at the workflow level and then go bottom up. We absolutely see use cases being adopted faster when they don't require a lot of context and you can give a minimal amount of instructions and then let them go out, right? At the commercial level, we're seeing a top-down approach work a little bit better. We're seeing less data silos. We're seeing the ability to
Yeah,
scale data-intensive use cases. These patterns are emerging, but I do think the reality of the situation right now is we're on a journey. I do think
yeah,
this is the decade of agents. I think those use cases, that killer silver bullet, is no different than what we experience with machine learning. The insights that were generated for one retailer didn't end up working for the other retailer. Same thing with financial institutions. So the learnings of machine learning are being applied here at the agentic level, which is the thing that works at the agentic level for one organization might not necessarily work for another because the operational processes are different, the incentives are different, the overall understanding of what my day-to-day job is different.
yeah.
And then you have to bring all that together and then figure out what's working.
It's interesting because you know it, Palantir is on this accelerating revenue curve, and like they're the only ones right now selling this data platform that's really being widely adopted. But we've seen that movie before, like in B2B and B2C e-commerce, 25 years ago, where people bought a lot of software, but it took a lot longer to actually deploy it, to absorb it and get it working. There's a difference between selling it and using it. Um, so yeah, and anyway, let's talk for a couple more of the products. Like we saw with at Dreamforce and after a bunch of new products, and you've
Hmm.
you've told me about, like, with Agentforce now we have access via an IDE. We have the Vibes product where for vibe coding we have script. So like LangGraph, you can mix some deterministic workflow rules along with the adaptive or probabilistic agent. Um, we've got the agentic applications themselves where agents are built in. Um, and you've talked to me something I didn't know about, applying actions against sets of rows or columns
Hmm.
on the MCP server. Help make sense out of all these, where they fit and how they might be applied.
Yeah, I think this is something we're talking about holistically as a partner organization of Salesforce, which is Agentforce is now a variety of different technologies and a variety of different particular motions within those technologies for outcomes. So, you mentioned a couple there. There's an IDE. There's now a grid function. There's a particular, workflow technology. All of these, I think, are Salesforce's experimentations around how to create that product market fit, right? And we're seeing instances of every single one of those being adopted very differently. If you think about the IDE, right, one of the things that makes our organization really excited about the IDE is the idea of agent-assisted deployments and configuration. That only makes us a better partner. That only makes us a faster partner. It also lowers costs for our end customers as we move faster through the project implementation. So this is exciting for us as a partner. If you think about Agentforce Grid, right, the ability to use an LLM similar to a Google Sheet and deploy a particular request out to your entire object, I think that's an exciting thing for mass updates, right? It's all about saving time, but doing so in a way that didn't require me to build an automation and allowed me to do it without involving a developer. I just ask what I need, right? So we're starting to create these technologies towards that customer behavior change. So they're changing our behaviors as a partner. They're changing Salesforce's users' behaviors. And then if you think about, you know, Agent Fabric, or if you think about Agentforce within the workflow tool in CRM, the amount of experimentation they're doing there. You know, one of the headlines recently has been maybe we don't just trust the model holistically and entirely. Well, I think that's where we bring in the deterministic versus non-deterministic balance. You mentioned the LangGraph type technology that's being baked into Salesforce, which they're calling Agent Script, right?
Yeah.
That's giving us the ability to interject during a non-deterministic resolution, a deterministic check. And what we're seeing, as a partner ourselves, where we're seeing that technology be applied, if you think about the way I described workflows earlier, we can create a spectrum of workflows. One side is entirely automatable, and one side is entirely human driven. Think about a group of folks sitting at a table making decisions, completely something I can't even touch with automation. Somewhere in the middle, I've got non-deterministic types of things that I want to automate, and I want to throw agents at it. But somewhere in there, I need to create guardrails, and the guardrails of pure natural language instructions wasn't enough. So what allows me to do is add deterministic injection into the non-deterministic resolution. I'm creating these hybrid versions of technology, and then us as partners, Salesforce users, we're going out and trying these things. We're looking for those instances where these things make sense. And so I think what Salesforce is doing is putting us in the capacity of worker bees, taking these tools forward and seeing what sticks, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm curious if it's Grid or one of the other tools that like helps clean up the metadata, because I know the metadata was there sort of for human consumption, but for agent consumption, it needs to be more complete and more
Mhm.
harmonized. And I know that was one of the barriers. Are there tools? One of these tools helping to clean up and harmonize the metadata?
I don't think we have a perfect answer for that yet, George. Right?
Not
I
yet.
think
Okay.
grid is a interesting start, and I can see various ways we can use grid to start to clean up some of our data. But the context is important, right? Yeah, you typically with dirty data within a CRM technology or a data technology, it's very difficult to pinpoint where all the dirty data lives and why, and
Yeah.
then adding on the layer of how do I fix it, right? There's a lot of deterministic rules on how to fix it. There's probably holes in information I need to actually fix it. That's not going to be solved with just agentic
Okay.
technology, because how
Got
does
it.
the agent know what action to take?
Okay. Well, let me ask you one thing that uh, just to add a little more color on both the MuleSoft and Informatica technologies. On MuleSoft, the fabric that they introduced,
Mhm.
I think this came out actually before Dreamforce. This is like it's a control plane for agents. Maybe add some color as to what its function is and how it's, from what I understand, it's meant to be for more than just agent force, I believe. But like MuleSoft originally was managing APIs, but
Mhm.
now like agents are the new, APIs essentially, or like microservices, and so we need a control plane for them. Maybe add some color as to what they're trying to accomplish there.
Yeah, I like to liken this to, if you think about an airport and the amount of ins and outs. There's humans going in and out, there's cars going in and out, there's buses, there's trucks, there's airplanes. And so MuleSoft is essentially conducting this massive operation and telling everything that goes in where it needs to go out. right? And that traditionally was either APIs or sometimes bulk transactions, right? Now what we're going to add to this layer is agents. So Salesforce is essentially sitting on this perfect canvassing tool for what I would say is the starting point for agent to agent communications. Also, agent to agent management and orchestration across entire workflows. So if we go back to the workflow example, kick off a workflow, there's going to be a whole set of things we want to do either deterministically or non-deterministically. And the question becomes, where are we going to use MuleSoft to figure out where to kick off an API, where to kick off a batch transaction, what external system to call, what agent force agent to call for what resolution. We'll get all of this kicked off asynchronously, and then
Oh,
bring it all back together as this orchestrator. So it's essentially managing all of this for us, and that's the vision for it.
so the orchestration, though, now I understand this is helpful. Heterogeneous, like the old API stuff, as well as the agents. It's trying to uh, make your application and agent estate like controlled and orchestrated as a whole. All right, so maybe do the same. Help paint the vision for Informatica. I imagine it's make it easy now to get it because it knows so much about legacy applications. It makes it easy to get more data into data cloud, as you described it as now this federated data platform. I assume it greatly widens the scope of what data it can federate.
What data they can federate and how, right? I think the biggest problem with the data cloud product or data 360 now is the inability for data auditing, the MDM problem, right? So the Informatica acquisition, I think, is one that we've been hearing about for a long time, and finally we're here. I think it takes data 360, the journey Data 360 has been on from CDP to data federation tool for an agentic enterprise. It takes it to that next level, the data auditing, the ability to integrate with pretty much anything across the enterprise, and that MDM solution. It's only going to make Data 360, as we see Informatica start to get more and more embedded into their narrative around Data 360. It only makes it a more powerful experience for that IT organization that chooses Data 360 to create their data foundations.
And then the last product thing to touch on. I know we're running a little past the bottom of the hour. Um, Observability. My understanding is like agent observability is like um, clickstream data that we had,
Hmm.
that we invented Hadoop for, 15 years ago. We wanted to track the consumer online giants wanted to track user behavior. They track, clickstream behavior. Now we need to track agent behavior, but
Hmm.
this time we use like all the reasoning traces, the tool calls, the context, the the outcomes. We can not only track that as part of Data Cloud, but we use that as part of the data flywheel to improve the agents. Is that the right way to think about it?
That's the right way to think about it. I actually don't think observability for agents is a technology problem. I think it's a workflow problem, and I'll tell you why. Right? If you think about how we've created technology to track customers, what they're viewing, what they're clicking on, what their sentiment is, and bring all this data together. My question to most organizations on this is: did you action every single customer's data? Right? All 1 million, 10 million, 20 million. Did you action every single one of those things? No, what you did was you ended up creating an alert system in some form or fashion of certain things you needed to action, and everything else fell off the plate, right? And maybe it went into a model, it went into a machine learning model, it went into an LLM model, whatever it is, and you try to create insights off of it, but you almost never got to the point where you actioned every single one of those data points or those profiles. So then the question is, if we start to apply some of this thinking and technology over to the agent observability, you have kind of 3 points where you can do observability on an agent: pre-deployment, post-deployment, and during iteration, right? Now, if you do it pre-deployment, you're almost never going to get to every edge case that actually is going to occur for this agent, right? You can try to simulate as much as you can. You can create, use test cases and use testing centers and potentially even use AI to actually test itself. But you're going to run into to gaps. Then during deployment, you're going to do observability. But if it's interacting with a million customers a day, it's interacting with thousands, hundreds, whatever it is, the question becomes at the scale of the deployment and the scale of your organization, are you going to, if an observability tool put all that data in front of you in some form or fashion, a dashboard, are you going to look through every single one of those data points? And then what are you going to do with it? Right? It's going to be very difficult for any organization, whatever scale, once the observability is put in front of you during deployment, to actually action every single one of those. So you're going to put alerts into place. You might do sentiment alerts, you might do guardrail alerts or some sort of trigger alert, but you're not going to be able to action everything. So the question becomes, how do you operationally solve around that problem? And then during iteration, you're going to start to iterate on things. So what was a problem before might no longer be a problem, and how do you account for that in your workflow? And what wasn't a problem before might start to become a problem now, and how do you account for that in the workflow? I think observability technology will get to the point where all the information will be in front of us. The question becomes, how do you workflow around it?
Oh, so it's okay. I understand. This is okay. This is really useful. What you're saying is it's it's a way to introspect how your organization is operating.
Hmm.
Like we used to do this for, let's say, site reliability engineering was how is my website operating? Now it's how is my whole organization operating and how do I want to improve it?
Right.
That's
And how do I refine the individual digital agents
yes.
to actually go after that, and knowing that as soon as I refine it, new problems will emerge and I will continue in
Yes.
this iteration cycle.
All right, that's a great place to end it, and a great place for us to come back to in a couple months and hear your thoughts on how that and the rest of the customers and the products are moving forward. Pratik, it's been great having you, and we look forward to doing another engagement with you in a few months.
George, thanks for
Thanks.
having me.
All right,
Appreciate it.
and everyone, tune in, and we'll and have another episode coming up soon. Thanks, everybody.